I was 18 years old when I went down to Dublin with a fist full of money and a cartload of dreams. Take your time, said my father, stop rushing like hell, and remember all's not what it seems to be. For there's fellas who'd cut you for the coat on your back, or the watch that you got from your mother. So take care, my young bucko, and mind yourself well. Would you give this sweet note to my brother? At the time, Uncle Benji was a policeman in Brooklyn, and my father, the youngest, looked after the farm. When a phone call from America said send the lad over, and my old fella said sure it wouldn't do any harm. For I've spent my life working this dirty old ground for a few pints of porter and the smell of a pond. And sure, maybe there's something you'll learn or you'll see if you can bring it back home. Make it easy on me. So I landed at Kennedy, and a big yellow taxi carried me and my bags through the streets and the rain. Well, my poor heart was thumping around with excitement that I hardly even heard what the driver was saying. We pulled in the shore parkways to the flatlands of Brooklyn, to my uncle's apartment on East 53rd. I was feeling so happy, I was humming a song, and I sang her as free as a bird. Well, to shorten the story, when I found out that day was Benji got shot down in an uptown parade. Oh, so while I was flying my way to New York, poor old Benji was lying in a cold city morgue. Well, I called up the old fella and I told him the news. I could tell he could hardly stand up in his shoes. And he wept as he told me, go ahead with the plan, and you're not to forget to be a proud Irish man. So I went down to Nellie's beside Fordham Road, and I started to learn about lift and load. But the heaviest thing that I carried that year was the bittersweet thoughts of my hometown so dear. I went home in December 'cause the old fella died. Had to borrow some money off Phil on the side. Oh, and all the bright flowers and brass couldn't hide the pearl-wisted face of my father. We sold up the old barnyard for what it was worth, and into my bag stuck a handful of earth. And I boarded a train, and I caught me a plane, and I found myself back in the US again. It's been 22 years since I've set foot in Dublin. The kids know to use the correct knife and fork, but I'll never forget the green grass and the rivers as I keep law and order on the streets of New York.
Good evening and welcome back to Bold Like a Leopard. And I hope you're enjoying this Wednesday evening. I was about to say Tuesday because I really am starting to feel like this news cycle is almost like drinking through a fire hose. So I do want to thank those of you that have continued to watch me on YouTube. I also want to make sure that you know that I also prefer that you watch me on some of these other platforms. I know that many of you probably like using the alt tech, but the problem like using the live streams, right? And you want to watch me live if you are used to doing it that way. But the fact is that I am, like many other creators, aware that it's not really a hospitable atmosphere right now for smaller creators or alternative creators on any of these platforms that are considered big tech, whether it's YouTube or Reddit or the Twitter, Facebook, and any of the mainstream platforms, Instagram, right, which I've never used, by the way, so it's not as if I have a personal axe to grind against Instagram, but the fact is that we are seeing just a closing and narrowing of the bandwidth of society to a very limited scope of views and topics, right? So the majority of this stream obviously is going to be about some of the news stories, but I am going to have, I guess, a main message that I'm going to go through probably towards the end about what I think is necessary for people to do in order to actually minimize the damage that they're going to be suffering through over the next few years of obviously the Biden administration and the Harris administration, all of those people who I think are making this a country where it's no longer of, by, and for the people. Everything's basically been mandated from above, and you don't really get a say in what you're going to be seeing in terms of policies and in terms of what your representatives are doing in your name, right? So that goes as far as policies in your own neighborhood, right? Let's say that you have a certain project that you want done on your house or something, and you have an argument with the local authority about building permits, right? You know, in many cities, it's probably almost impossible to get any sort of permitting for it, right? Especially if you're in one of these states like California, where I know So then magnify that on a macro scale. Think about that in terms of Washington, D.C. and the way that they affect every single industry. Also, think about that in terms of the way Washington, D.C. relates to the rest of the world, right? So they diminish your rights on the local level if you're living in another state like North Carolina or even, even Delaware or what have you, that you're already at a lower level. Think about if you live in a country overseas, right? We see the U.S. continuing its wars in Yemen and apparently now redeploying troops to Iraq. I saw a story from Foreign Policy magazine, which is a joke, by the way. Foreign Policy magazine is written for people who consider themselves to be foreign policy professionals, right? So think tank people who work in the State Department and It's just a trade magazine, and they were talking about how the Biden administration had waited too long in terms of its action on Iran. Now, bear in mind, the Biden administration has been in office for only about a month, and it's not a matter of waiting too long. It's a matter of, uh, America is a weak country in the eyes of other states around the world because of people like Joe Biden, and that goes for Iran, that goes as far as China and Russia. And if you're living in China or Russia and you're one of the people in power right now, how do you think it looks? How do you think the United States appears the way that its leadership is working, whether it's on the national level or you're looking at states like New York and New Jersey? I did want to mention, by the way, I do have an article out, which I'll show on the screen briefly, but it's a new article about basically this party called, or they haven't even called themselves a party yet, but they're trying to form a new principled conservative party. And it really shows just the vacuous nature of American politics right now, because these are people who supported perhaps one of the weakest presidents ever coming to power, right? People like Evan McMullin, the Lincoln Project, the Never Trump movement. And I get it that they don't like Trump on a personal level, or they don't like maybe his beliefs and policies. But now that they're trying to say, oh, we want to create a principled conservative party, which is a disingenuous thing, by the way, but let's take it for them at their word. This article, which I'm posting the link in the chat for those of you that want to read it. This party, what exactly are the principles that it is fighting for? That's my question. They're not ever, if you look at people like Evan McMullin or Steve Schmidt, or maybe some of these so-called Republican governors like Mike DeWine and Charlie Baker, you never see them get on TV and give these, basically roast beef necked rants against anything besides Donald Trump. So they're not going to complain about the draconian enforcement of infringements against the Second Amendment that the Biden administration is attempting to put into place, nor also the policing of freedom of speech in this country through big tech companies and things like that, which is one of the main issues, probably the biggest issue of our era, right? Imagine thinking back when people like me were in middle school and we got the internet as a new tool, that this would be the tool that would be used in order to basically put horse blinders on every American and tell them, this is what you can or can't, this is what you can and can't discuss and say, right? None of these fake Republicans are talking about it. And I think it's really, it's a barometer as to who is quote unquote principled or not. I call them the principled asterisk party, right? And these are people who are saying, well, we're going to leave the Republican Party because Donald Trump has polluted it. He's made it into an intolerant party. But the fact is that they don't really stand against intolerance, because if they did, they would be calling for a freer society, a society where more views are welcome. Even, by the way, views that are bigoted, so to speak, whether they're religiously or racially bigoted, they are views that are protected under the Second Amendment, or sorry, the First Amendment. In any case, so we have governors, and this is something that I'm going to be working on probably on a piece that could appear next week. We have governors of states like Maryland and Vermont and Massachusetts that are belonging to the Republican Party. But do those states look like bastions of anything resembling conservatism, even in any loose definition? Remember, I don't even consider myself strictly defined as a conservative. I consider myself as a libertarian. I hold many conservative personal beliefs. I am very much for the protection of the unborn, right? I am pro-life. There are many libertarians that are pro-choice, right? It's sort of a distinction that is, it makes the definitions much more difficult, right? I am for the Second Amendment, right? Those are principles that put me in the conservative camp. But then on the other hand, I am strictly for separation of church and state. I don't want any religion, whether it's Christianity or Islam or Judaism, to be used in order to define the way our laws are made, because I know that the founders were living in a time when it was only in they were looking in the rearview mirror, looking at nations like France, Spain, and even Britain itself, where sectarianism had turned society into a stratified hellhole. Right? People were leaving England in order to reach the United States because of religious intolerance. That's why we are a nation where Christianity is so diverse. How many sects of Christianity do you see? I personally can drive through even some of the more run-down parts of town and see all sorts of different denominations. I don't know what the distinctions are, but we have, thank God, just a bounty of different viewpoints on what their vision of Jesus's life was, or what the gospel is. I'm not Christian personally, and I think those people should be free to express their views. But if we were to, so that's something that I believe is a principle that would make me a liberal. I don't think that we should impose any religion on the country, because then you would start to have to define which viewpoint of that religion is acceptable. You would never end it. So that puts me in the liberal camp, right? And another area is drug policy. I talked a little bit about that last time, right? I don't believe that we should be imprisoning people because of chemical dependencies, right? I think we should be treating them. And that puts me in the liberal camp. So these Republican governors stand against me on virtually every issue. So why would I want to support anyone who gives me virtually 0% of the things that I want? I'd rather take somebody who gives me 60 to 70%. Somebody like Donald Trump, right? There are certainly things I disagreed with. And that's basically what this piece is about, that for whatever the flaws of Donald Trump, the party that he led, the Republican Party, if it wants to go forward and actually have a vision, it can't act as if he was some sort of aberration and they have to go back to this, country club Republican Party, the type of Republican Party that most of us grew up with, that was mainly concerned with the ideas of the Heritage Foundation and, open, in some cases, open borders, right? Koch brothers ideas. And it has to sort of embrace a vision that, stands up for a segment of the American public that's been ignored. The working poor, many of the working class, right? And I think you can do that with a more freedom and capitalism oriented vision and make it work, right? That's really the reason that it becomes a conservative right-leaning party as opposed to one of these Marxist parties. You can still talk about class divisions without doing class warfare. And that's what this article sort of hints at, and what I'll probably continue to write about in the future. There are other people that write about it, by the way. And there was a recent poll that said that under the past two presidents, Donald Trump and Barack Obama, I believe 13% of the so-called blue-collar vote defected from the Democrats to the Republicans. So this is an ongoing trend that has to be, sort of monitored and talked about, and really analyze why that's happening. So that's as far as my article. Again, that is the last link in the chat, and I probably will add it to the description later on both the YouTube and BitChute and other videos. So going on. So there's a lot of talk. I was watching some creators talk about it already, and not going to mention all of them. Some of them I actually don't like, but you have a lot of these liberal and Democratic establishment people starting to say, this is really a mistake, what we've been doing over the past few months, right? In terms of a variety of policies that the Biden administration is undertaking. And one of the most interesting ones is that Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton, and it actually should be delegate because she's not a voting representative in the House. She's from D.C., and she's saying that the razor wire fencing around the Capitol makes it look like a concentration camp. And then she says there are fewer and fewer credible threats, said Norton, who has proposed a bill that would prevent the fencing from becoming permanent. Democratic Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton, a non-voting member of the House representing the District of Columbia, is calling for House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to take down the razor wire fencing surrounding the U.S. Capitol, comparing it to a concentration camp. So that's an interesting statement, and I'm going to highlight a little issue with that at the end. U.S. Capitol Police requested that congressional leaders allow them to keep the fencing in place until September. Norton, a member of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, has proposed a bill that would prevent the fencing from becoming permanent. There are fewer and fewer credible threats, Norton told Just the News during an interview. This is interesting. So Just the News is a pretty right-leaning publication. It's led by John Solomon. I don't think you could consider him a Democrat. I would say he's a pretty credible journalist, but Norton actually went on the record with them, and that's pretty interesting. So she says that keeping it up until September shows that the Capitol Police, who could have prevented much that happened on January the 6th, simply by calling in reinforcements from the dozen or so police forces, are now doubling down. The mob that came was summoned virtually by the president. He's gone. They have now seen that even if the offense isn't up, that the police forces know what to do. I've always said that when it becomes clear that there are not threats sufficient to keep this fence, that I'll take it down. Now that we're already seeing calls to take down the wiring around it, which makes it look like a concentration camp, certainly that can be done now. What are we afraid of? Our own shadow? And then she continues, and even if my Republican friends are saying take it down, I think you now see a bipartisan call for getting the Capitol looking once again like the Capitol, Norton said, alluding to a letter that more than 40 GOP lawmakers recently sent to Pelosi asking for the fence to come down. Norton said that if the fence does not come down soon, she'll continue to reach out to her colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support her bill to remove the fence. You shouldn't need a bill to take down the fence, she said, but if the fence doesn't come down, I'm going to move this bill to the House, and I think if I can get into both houses, I think the entire House and Senate are embarrassed to be fenced in this way. Norton vowed to hold hearings in the House if the razor wire portion of the fencing does not come down. Let's get the razor wire down, and let's make sure you don't keep extending the time for this fence to remain, or I will hold hearings to find out why. Now, I think some of this is empty threats. She can't actually hold hearings by her lonesome as a non-voting member of Congress. But one thing I want to highlight that's an irony, she used the concentration camp analogy. And it shows really the disconnect between the standards of, first of all, elected officials versus non-elected people, people who are not elected to government, and also between liberals and non-liberals, right? And I use liberals in air quotes because this isn't a liberal philosophy these people are professing. It's actually illiberal, the way that, in this case, she is being a liberal because she's going against some of this, some of this blatant militarism, right? But in general, Eleanor Holmes Norton is an illiberal person. She's very much a racial arsonist and things like that. But so contrast this to the reaction from Disney to Gina Carano, who was fired for also making an analogy concerning how people are treated by their neighbors, as if the way that you become dehumanized is through your neighbors treating you that way, and that's the way it became possible for the Germans to persecute, the unpersoned people like the Jews, Gypsies, certain other minorities, right? Jay witnesses, homosexuals, communists and people like that. That's how it became possible. And that's what Gina Carano was talking about in terms of the culture of today, canceling people because of nuanced issues or statements that they made in the past, even jokes in some cases. Think Count Dankula. So contrast her treatment to what Representative Norton has received. It just isn't the same, because if you are a person who professes a liberal worldview as part of your personality, you get carte blanche. You get to say what you want. You get to make hyperbolic statements. And in both cases, I think, like, certainly in Representative Norton's case, or Delegate Norton, I don't think the Capitol is really like a concentration camp. It's really, you're using this fencing in order to keep the people out, right? You're not trying to pen the elected officials in, at least not so far as I know. So I think that she grossly exaggerated it, but I understand what she's getting at, that we're seeing this tyranny being nakedly displayed in the Capitol, right? There's all sorts of different platitudes we say about America. Like we say that it's that this is some people have called it the birthplace of democracy, which isn't true, but modern democracy has largely been propagated by the United States, and yet you see the legislature penned in by razor wire and high fencing and everything like that. So I get sort of what she's talking about, but it is a huge exaggeration. And I think Carano also to some degree exaggerated, but you're allowed to exaggerate in America. You shouldn't be fired for exaggerating. And unfortunately, it's becoming less and less of an exaggeration every day concerning what Carano said, right? She was saying that Americans of different viewpoints are basically being treated as, untouchables by their neighbors. And that's how you create the intolerant society where more serious and horrific crimes are committed, right? And it's certainly something that it weighs on my mind every day, including, during parts of the day when I'm not even watching the news or anything. So I'm definitely thinking about that. This next article, also from Just the News, which is a pretty impressive outlet. I also have started using Revolver a little bit. I think that they're pretty interesting. But it says, amid Capitol riot, FBI released files from the Kennedy-era investigation into Nancy Pelosi's father. In a 1961 memo to the White House, an agent summarized allegations that Thomas D'Alessandro Jr. took payoffs from applicants to the police force and helped to hinder the investigation and prosecution of crimes. So people like to forget. So Nancy Pelosi wasn't born Nancy Pelosi. It's her married name. Her maiden name is Nancy D'Alessandro. Both her dad and her brother were the mayor of Baltimore at different points. I think her dad was mayor in the 50s. Her brother was mayor in the 70s. And she comes from a political family. She is part of a political dynasty. Many people in the Democratic Party and to some degree also the GOP, it's a little bit less prominent in the GOP, are part of political dynasties, right? You have the Kennedys, you have I believe it's what's that state? I think in Michigan, there's also another dynasty, the Cheeks the Kilpatrick dynasty, right? Carolyn Cheeks Kilpatrick and her son Kwame, if you remember them. That didn't end up too good. There are many different political dynasties. There's the Jackson dynasty in Chicago, right? Jesse Jackson Sr. and Jr. So you have this political class over there. And this is just a small window into that. The files reveal the results of an intense 2-month investigation into Thomas D'Alessandro Jr., a Maryland politician who served in a long career as a member of Congress and mayor of Baltimore. John F. Kennedy's White House ordered the investigation after JFK planned to appoint D'Alessandro to a government post. A routine FBI name check revealed allegations against D'Alessandro, according to February 6, 1961 teletype from FBI director. The director at the time was J. Edgar Hoover. The urgent teletype seemed to signal the goal of ensuring that D'Alessandro would be appointed to a government watchdog board that reviewed defense contracts. The White House has requested that we proceed with a special inquiry investigation, but that if substantial derogatory information were developed, we should report this and discontinue any further inquiries because substantiation of any of the allegations would eliminate Mr. D'Alessandro. The FBI director wrote in the teletype that is located on page 19 of the Trove. Assign immediate. So let me explain what this is. Let's say you're appointed to be the Secretary of State, whatever it is. Immediately, so you get appointed, then they have to confirm you. But even before they confirm you, the FBI has to screen you, and that creates automatically, they call it an investigation. It doesn't mean necessarily that you did anything wrong, but if you read, for example, this is a book I've had for a few years. It's called, where is it? It's by Gary Aldrich. I'd have to take it off the shelf, and I can't actually see it right now. But Gary Aldrich was an FBI agent who worked in the Clinton White House, and he actually was in charge of some of these investigations of people who were appointees of the Clinton administration, and they automatically screen you for various criminal things in your history. And that's one of the things that happens when you get appointed to the federal office. And with D'Alessandro, it brought up a lot of these things. In 1945, it was alleged that one Charles F. Camarata had been able to get away with all sorts of criminal activities in Baltimore, Maryland, and had operated almost unmolested due to his friendship with and the protection of Congressman D'Alessandro. One unnamed agent wrote in a January 30th, 1961 memo to the White House. In the same memo, which begins on page 30 of the collection, the agent summarizes allegations that a powerful D'Alessandro took payoffs from applicants to the police force, and that he helped to hinder the investigation and prosecution of crimes. Elsewhere, the memo cites a confidential source who has furnished reliable information in the past, reporting that D'Alessandro appeared on stage at a 1943 rally for the National Council of American-Soviet Friendship, which was formed in 1943 by the Communist Party USA as a Soviet front group, according to the FBI. So, yes, is this necessarily criminal activity? No, it's not criminal. Remember that during the war, the U.S. and the Soviet Union were allies. But once the war was over, yeah, this could be used against you as part of the Red Scare. So, judging by her family history, Nancy Pelosi shouldn't even be in government because her father was involved, apparently involved with certain racketeering issues as a Baltimore area politician. Apparently may have had some contact with pro-Soviet activists during the 1940s. So the same sort of red baiting and Russia gating that she does concerning Donald Trump, or to expand that, talking about this alt-right stuff and extremism and things like that. The same thing could legitimately be used against her based on, by the way, the actions of her dad and possibly this doesn't concern her brother, but, and eventually a lot of this information will by law be made, public concerning perhaps her brother, who became a government official several years later, right? So I just wanted to say that this is basically the type of society that Nancy Pelosi has recreated, the type of society that J. Edgar Hoover made possible, the Red Scare of the 1950s, which, by the way, there were issues in the 1950s. Why shouldn't Joe McCarthy have not been looking into the infiltration of communists in the United States? The Cold War was going on and things like that, but there were abuses of those processes of investigating people. Nowadays, it's much, much worse. I would argue that McCarthyism was a very mild ripple compared to what's going on today. Apparently, David French, on the same note as those Never Trumpers discovered earlier, he's a little shocked that one of his friends had his book banned by Amazon, which is called "When Harry Became Sally: Responding to the Transgender Moment," which is it's a book that I read I would call it a little blurb about it. It's sort of skeptical of the concept that somebody could actually be a transsexual or transgender, right? and it has gotten good reviews and things like that, which we're gonna talk a little bit about that in a moment. But this guy David French, he was in the past a writer for the National Review. He was just a deranged member of the anti-Trump right, people who were continually saying, "Oh, he doesn't have the temperament. He's the wrong person. He's immoral and everything." And that was all they would talk about over the past few years, morality and whether a person has the correct temperament. And in the meantime, they were ignoring the actual problem, the real problem that was going on, which was the censorship of people on the right and the left, right? There are people like Glenn Greenwald on the left who are increasingly censored, even people who I despise, like Max Blumenthal, who are all the time being, pressured through threats of censorship and things like that. And I've never, ever supported censorship, even of people who are, in my mind, just ridiculous and even, disgusting. People I think are unbelievably awful. I don't believe they should be censored if they're not doing anything illegal, if they're not calling for violence or using their platform in order to directly incite people to attack something. And I mean like imminently attack something. So people like Sean King, who continually uses Twitter in order to create mobs to attack people for alleged racism, they never get censored. But somebody like Ryan T. Anderson absolutely will get censored. And David French was ignoring this for the past few years. And not only that, he was saying that Parler, which by the way, I think Parler is not a great platform. I think it's not very functional, and I use it. So those of you that use it and like it, I don't know how you tolerate it. It's pretty annoying to use, but I don't think that Amazon and Google and Apple should have ganged up on them. So David French was justifying it, right? And that's the whole issue. If you don't like an app, if you don't like a social media website, you can choose to just disengage. I've already done it, right? I've done it with a number of platforms already. I don't use WhatsApp anymore. People I know have asked me, why aren't you using WhatsApp? And I say I'm not using it anymore because I don't use any products that are owned by Facebook. I do continue to have a Facebook account that I check in with people every once in a while, but I don't really use it anymore apart from, some vestigial contacts I have with people who you can't contact anywhere else because they're still addicted to it. But yeah, I gave up on WhatsApp. I never really used Instagram. So you can take a position where you choose not to use a product actively, right? I actually bought something on Barnes & Noble once because I didn't want to use Amazon, right? This was a while back. And these are things that I think are personal choices, right? So David French didn't understand that. He said, yeah, Amazon should be able to basically stab this website in the back and obliterate it simply because they are a private company, right? Even though they have contracts with Parler, even though there were a number of service agreements in place, he completely supported it. And now when his friend gets his book kicked off, he is starting to wake up to really the world that he helped to create. And to be fair, I don't think he's actually going to be moved terribly by this. He's going to start to say, "Oh, this is a real problem. We should actually start to do something about this." But this is somebody who he's moved to do this only because it's become so obvious that he can't hide it anymore. I don't think he's actually going to become the type of person fighting for freedom of expression and the Bill of Rights that he should have been the entire time during the Trump presidency and everything. By the way, Donald Trump, I think, was a not a great president, but certainly a tolerable president in terms of the Bill of Rights. He didn't necessarily shine because he didn't. He first of all, he signed a renewal of the Patriot Act. He also, he allowed a lot of the abuses that were incurred by the Patriot Act to continue, violations of the Fourth Amendment. He did the bump stock ban. And there are blemishes on his record, but you talk about them as blemishes. But on the other hand, Biden is actually, you're not talking about blemishes. This is a person who is on an active warpath against the Bill of Rights. This isn't somebody with, certain problematic, blind spots as far as the core principles of our free society, the less free society than ever. But still, we should remember the Constitution as something we aspire to have. This is something, it was only on RT yesterday. I believe it is everywhere now. So on the note of all those people who are having what they call Biden remorse, there literally are shipping containers with illegal immigrant children stored inside on these bunk beds. I don't mean to laugh. I think it's pretty frightening that you have some of these kids alone in Texas with no next of kin available, or anyone for that matter, right? And Biden is basically putting them in shipping containers, and this isn't going to end well, right? Because if you know anyone who's been in juvenile hall, or they've been in any other sort of situation where they're in the custody of a different ward than their parent or guardian, it's ripe for abuse, right? By the way, there was abuse by certain Border Patrol personnel under the Biden administration, things that should have been highlighted. And I think, whatever the hyperbole about the policy, people were calling them concentration camps. Again, dramatically misguided hyperbole, right? Nobody was getting murdered. Nobody was getting hung or anything. But yes, there were abuses in those camps under the Trump administration. And I think appropriately, the Department of Homeland Security had to discipline many of these people. But now you're seeing the Biden administration doing the same thing. And apparently there is no massive outcry against it. Now, there is some sort of an outcry. I believe that, let me see here. So I could find a video about the response from, who was it? I believe it was Jennifer Psaki. So let me see here. I think it was on Rumble. So this concerns the children in cages, and we'll play this. I haven't seen it yet.
And to ensure that, as you well know, but just for others, is not to expel unaccompanied children who arrive at the border.
Is the Biden administration reopening a temporary facility for migrant children in Texas?
Well, first, the policy of this administration, as you well know, but just for others, is not to expel unaccompanied children who arrive at the border. And the process, how it works, is that Customs and Border Control continue to transfer unaccompanied children to the HHS Office of Refugee Resettlement. That can take a couple of days. I just want to give this context because people need to understand the process. But because of COVID-19 protocols, the social distancing requirements, the capacity at existing Office of Refugee Resettlement shelters has been significantly reduced because, of course, you can't have a child in every bed. There needs to be spacing, and we abide by those spacing to protect the kids who are living in those facilities for a short period of time. And to ensure the health and safety of these kids, HHS took steps to open an emergency facility to add capacity where these children can be provided the care they need before they are safely placed with families and sponsors. So it's a temporary reopening during COVID-19. Our intention is very much to close it, but we want to ensure that we can follow COVID protocols as unaccompanied minors come into the United States.
But it's the same facility that was open for a month in the Trump administration, summer 2019. That is when Joe Biden said, under Trump, there have been horrifying scenes at the border of kids being kept in cages, and Kamala Harris said, basically babies in cages is a human rights abuse being committed by the United States government. So how is this any different than that?
We very much feel that way. And
So,
these are facilities, let me be clear here. One, there's a pandemic going on. I'm sure you're not suggesting that we have children right next to each other in ways that are not COVID safe, are you?
I'm suggesting that.
So this is non sequitur, right? The issue that we're talking about first of all, she is putting unaccompanied minors in the same holding container. So, I mean, there's still plenty of room for them to spread COVID if that was really the problem, right? Remember, children are much less susceptible to COVID than almost any other age group. I think there's sort of a middle area, but largely the affected group is people who are over 80, right? Are the most at risk, and then it steadily declines as you have a younger age. So that's not really the issue. But even if it was the issue, if you're putting them in camps, they have common facilities, common restrooms. There's no single person restroom in a shipping container, right? Unless these are the most luxurious shipping containers in the world. But do you realize how ridiculous this attempt to defend this matter of obvious hypocrisy is, that you're saying, well, I mean, we have to separate them to some degree because of COVID? No, it is unbelievable how they just grasp at straws for any excuse.
Kamala Harris said that this facility, putting people in this facility, was a human rights abuse committed by the United States government, and Joe Biden said, under Trump, there have been horrifying scenes of at the border of kids being kept in cages. Now, it's not under Trump, it's under Biden.
This is not kids being kept in cages. This is kids. This is a facility that was opened that's going to follow the same standards as other HHS facilities. It is not a replication, certainly not. That is never our intention of replicating the immigration policies of the past administration, but we are in a circumstance where we are not going to expel unaccompanied minors at the border. That would be inhumane. That is not what we are going to do here as an administration. We need to find places that are safe under COVID protocols for kids to be, where they can have access to education, health and mental services, consistent with their best interests. Our goal is for them to then be transferred to families or sponsors. So this is our effort to ensure that kids are not in close proximity, and that we are abiding by the health and safety standards that the government has been set out.
Just quickly on climate. Last week, the climate envoy, John Kerry, said that there are only 9 years left to save the world from the effects of climate change. Does President Biden share that assessment? 9 years.
I don't have a new timeline to give you from here. I can confirm for you, though, that the President agrees with former Secretary Kerry that it's a crisis, that time is of the essence. We need to act quickly, and that's why climate is a key part of his agenda.
So after running a campaign where they were talking about all these deadlines to get climate back in order, well, now they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to give timelines or anything. And this is really one of the reasons. Like, I think Tim Pool has been complaining about how people over-focus on Jem Psaki. No, she is the perfect focus, because this is the perfect spokesperson for real disinformation, right? They were talking all the time about Sarah Huckabee, and look, I get it that Sarah Huckabee probably said things once in a while that were not accurate, but I think Jen Psaki is literally like the personification of the dishonest spokesperson, right? And people are latching onto it. She's clearly unprepared. She has to, give these convoluted answers, and in this case, she said, well, we're reopening a facility where the Trump administration was housing kids, caging kids. They were caging them. We're not caging them. That's basically the absurd logic that she's using. We're using the same facility, doing the same thing, but it's not the same thing. So that's really why people are honing in on her. So people are going nuts. These are people on the left. I think Ian Higgins is for sure on the left. I think I remember who he is. I don't remember where he writes, but we could take a look real quick. I think he used to be with The Intercept, but I could be wrong. I guess his name is pronounced Owen, but who cares? He says, meet the new boss. You'll be amazed at the similarities between him and the old boss. This person, the Current Affairs magazine, which is a left-wing publication, weird, thought kids in cages was not going to be a thing anymore. This person says, concentration camp expansion under a Democrat administration. Umair Haque, who's an idiot, one of the dumbest people on the left you'll ever meet. He's on Medium, but he says, here we go with the concentration camps again. And if you think I exaggerate, those sure look like cages to me. So for once, somebody who never gets anything right, finally, a broken clock is right once in a decade. That's in his case, right? He's wrong about literally everything else. By the way, this was a guy who would kiss Elizabeth Warren's feet every single day. If you know who I'm talking about, he's on Medium. Dana Lass says, kids in cages is now migrant facility for children. Drew Holden says, big difference, 20 months, and the new president says. So it says here, Washington Post says, viewing U.S. border cells derided as cages, Central American officials pledge more immigration cooperation. But now the Washington Post is saying, first migrant facility for children opens under Biden. Now, the photos don't even look that much different. It looks like there were trailers under Trump, and now there's trailers under Biden. So if you had such an objection to this issue under Trump, then why aren't you mad now? I remember there were like rampant protests against the quote unquote children in cages for, I think it was the summer of 2019, and people just wouldn't shut up about it. There were people who started to say, for example, this person said, detaining kids is never an ideal situation, but some things to consider. Will these kids have beds with real blankets and not foil? Now, the foil, by the way, wasn't even under Trump. That was under Barack Obama. People just don't, they don't want to be consistent. They don't want to tell. Those photos were from 2014. Next question, will these kids have access to showers, etc., and clean clothes? Well, now, according to Jen Psaki, we have to worry about COVID. So should they all be using the same shower? Or should they, like how many ways can this go wrong? And this is according to the liberal mind, right? Will they be played? So anyway, there's a lot of people who are basically having a meltdown over this. And I think that there really is this now expanding cloud of frustration on the left over what they actually got, as opposed to what they were promised. MC is correctly pointing out, this is something that I forgot, but he's absolutely correct. He said you had a nut attack an ICE facility over it. Absolutely. The guy Van Spronson in I think it was in Washington State attempted to kill ICE agents with a number of, I think he had some IEDs that he created and also an assault rifle. So this is like how the parallel reality victimizes the people who subscribe to it, because they just can't remember what was actually happening during the time that they were so laser focused on one person in Donald Trump, right? So Neera Tanden is apparently on life support in terms of her, not literally, God forbid. I mean, I don't like her, but she's not in poor health. But her nomination is on the skids right now because it from what I understand, the only hope for Neera Tanden becoming the head of the Office of Management and Budget, which is in charge of delivering the White House's budget priorities to Congress, the only thing that could help her is if Lisa Murkowski, the senator for Alaska, defects. She's a GOP senator, and she votes for her along with 49 Democrats and I think 2 independents. And that could very well happen, knowing Lisa Murkowski and her lack of actual ideas and a vision. So I'm not saying that this is impossible, but it's going to be a little hard. And by the way, her nomination confirmation votes for the committees, I think there's two committees, the budget and budget committee, and I maybe it was a Homeland Security committee. Both of them have put off their confirmation votes, and that's just the confirmation votes for the committees, right? Which I think that she can get voted in with a tie, but she has to be voted in by a majority of the Senate as well, and there isn't a majority yet until or unless Lisa Murkowski makes it a 50-50 split, in which case they would have to have Kamala Harris come in and vote to break the tie, which could happen, but it would be a very unusual situation. And not only would it be unusual, but it would lead, in my mind, to the end of Lisa Murkowski's career, because people in Alaska would start to say, well, do you actually have any belief in anything, right? Because if you're willing to support Neera Tanden, who is a member of the Democratic Party's elite, a person who was incredibly close to the Clinton family, a person who also had a very disparaging and a crooked relationship, not only with people on the right, but with people on the far left. People like the Bernie Sanders campaign would constantly trash Bernie Sanders as a Russian plant after 2016. I think Lisa Murkowski would end her career doing this. But the Washington Post is calling this the perfect storm of bipartisan hypocrisy in terms of her tweets, when in reality, there's no one is obligated to vote for someone's confirmation, right? If the GOP wanted to just make it a point to vote against every single one of Biden's nominees, which I think they should have, but they didn't, they could do it, because the Democrats were very stingy on some of the Republican nominees. So Jill Filipovic, who wrote about this in the Washington Post, went and said that she said she should be enjoying bipartisan support, according to Jill Filipovic. Republicans don't agree with Tanden's policy preferences, but she has a kind of bootstraps personal story that conservatives usually cheer. Born to immigrant parents, she went to Yale Law School en route to a career capped by helming the Center for American Progress, arguably the most influential Democratic think tank. These are points against her, right? Well, why would you want to vote for someone who headed the Center for American Progress, possibly the most corrupt think tank, well, not the most, but, up there among the most corrupt think tanks in Washington, D.C. And it says she has personal experience with some of the safety net programs within OMB's purview. Her mother relied on government benefits to keep the family afloat when Tanden was young. Democrats are notoriously hard to please, but she's squarely in her party's mainstream. To the left of Biden and Senator Joe Manchin, to the right of Senator Bernie Sanders, who now chairs the Senate Budget Committee. But even a moderate Republican such as Senator Susan Collins says she won't vote to confirm Tanden based in part on her temperament. Well, no, the temperament issue is exactly one of the problems that they were talking about for 5 years. They were obsessed with, does this person have the temperament? Is this the type of person we want? People who would, and by the way, people are getting banned over temperament. People are being tone policed all the time. Jimmy Dore, a left-winger, was being tone policed endlessly over the past month for telling telling progressive Democrats to force a vote on Medicare for all. So this idea that it's hypocritical to deny someone a nomination over tweets and public statements and things like that, I think that, first of all, that's not really the only issue with Neera Tanden. And the real issue should be that she is basically a tool of corporate America. And I know that the Senate doesn't care about that, but this idea that she's entitled to this seat because somebody decided, we can't have, this is just bullshit, right? Neera Tanden is, she's just not entitled to it. She brings up people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and saying, only 11 Republicans in the House of Representatives voted with Democrats to strip committee assignments from Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has used various social media platforms to peddle extremist rhetoric. Well, okay, so you had 11 Republicans who did that. By the way, that was also, in my opinion, wrong, right? I was against it when they did end up stripping, what's the guy's name? Steve King. And I said that his views, while they might be maybe outside of the mainstream, they weren't violent they weren't extreme to the degree that they were violent when he was in Congress. He believed that the U.S. is a Western European nation, basically Western European in terms of mindset. He wasn't saying anything in terms of how races should be treated differently or anything, right? And by the way, I'm sure that Steve King, his views are probably representative of a lot of the people in Iowa. Not enough people, because he ended up getting primaried and defeated by another Republican. But people don't want to talk about those issues. They only want to highlight things that don't really matter, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene, ultimately, some of the things that she shared were really not that critical in the grand scheme of things. And here we go. So she goes back to the issue of Jeff Sessions and how his comments on race kept the Senate from confirming him for federal judgeship. In 2017, he was confirmed as Trump's attorney general. Well, what was the difference between the 80s and when he was nominated in 2017? The difference is that in the 80s, the Democrats controlled Congress. In the 20 teens or whatever you call it, they didn't. So she wrote this piece this is the same woman, Jill Filipovic. She wrote this, that don't be fooled by Jeff Sessions. And it was all about how the things he said, maybe he wasn't saying anything extreme, but you have to read into it, right? That is exactly the issue, that she was talking about exactly the same flaws that people see with Neera Tanden. She was policing with Jeff Sessions, who, by the way, was a bad nominee too. He was, in retrospect, Trump picked the wrong person as attorney general, but not wrong for the reasons that Jill Filipovic said. So this is a person, she's given a platform by the Washington Post. This is a woman who wrote, basically, leftist crap for Cosmo, a magazine that is known mainly for giving sex tips for women on their front page, hinting, this is the way to drive him wild. By the way, Jeff Sessions shouldn't be attorney general. And now she's writing for the Washington Post to defend Neera Tanden, a woman who engaged in blatant lies about Russia and its effect in 2016, and accusing everyone of being a Russian agent. She doesn't deserve to be, in any federal position, and I'm totally in agreement that neither Democrats nor Republicans should want someone like that in the government. Let's see here. This actually was a well put together argument against Jeff Sessions getting into the Attorney General's office. I don't know why I kept it up, but yeah, there were many issues where he was wrong in terms of his approach to things like civil asset forfeiture and things like that. But Jill Filipovic could care less about that, right? She was writing about how he would end abortion, right? Unilaterally, right? Things like that. And about Russia. And so looking back, she was disingenuous, continues to be disingenuous. And speaking of disingenuous, Pink News is saying Jessica Watkins, Oath Keeper extremist charged over the Capitol riots, at risk in custody because she is trans. And they go through this person who is a transsexual Oath Keeper, right? A member of one of the groups that barged into the Capitol. And then afterward turned herself in to the police in Ohio And first of all, does that sound like a traitor, like a terrorist, somebody who turns themselves into jail when they're, when they're accused of a crime or wanted for a crime? In my opinion, no. Her attorney claimed Saturday that she has suffered a litany of abuses from law enforcement for being trans, which ranged from medical neglect to humiliation. As a transgender female, she is at high risk of harsh treatment in custody. Public defender Michelle Peterson wrote in a motion for home detention, according to BuzzFeed News. Indeed, while in local custody, she was treated harshly. Watkins was left naked in a cell with lights on 24 hours a day for 4 days in full view of everyone else, the attorney continued. This was a response to a hunger strike she underwent as she sought medical attention for an injury to her arm. Instead of medical attention, she was stripped naked and put on suicide watch, she added. Peterson noted that Watkins, a former United States Army Ranger who served in Afghanistan, was ousted from the military after her sexual orientation was discovered. No other details of this supposed ejection were given. So that they could probably easily research that, but that doesn't matter because they go on to basically, characterize this person as. So here we go. So they characterize this person in such a way. Watkins is facing some of the most serious charges of misconduct for the deadly insurrection, which saw an explosion of violence flood the opulent Congress corridors. 5 people died as some of Donald Trump's most slavish and enraged supporters stormed the building in an effort to stymie Congress's certification of Joe Biden's victory. A grand jury indicted Watkins and 8 others associated with the Oath Keepers in what has become one of the largest conspiracy cases lodged by the State Justice Department so far in connection to the riots. The indictment claims that the 9 defendants worked together in advance of the brawl, with some working to undermine the results within a week of Election Day. Investigators claim Watkins, a dues-paying member of the Oath Keepers, uploaded photographs and videos of herself in the Capitol during the riots. She was no, quote, ancillary player who became swept up in the moment, but a key figure who put into motion the violence that overwhelmed the Capitol. Watkins had formed a subset of the most extreme insurgents that plotted, then tried to execute a sophisticated plan to forcibly stop the results of oppression. So basically they're saying that while we support totally the transgender ideology, meaning that this person should be considered, simply by his or her own decision to be a woman, even though physiologically and in every other possible way they're not, right? That this is also a person who is devoid of any other civil liberties because of the political beliefs that this person holds, right? In a normal world, you would recognize that perhaps this person isn't of sound mind, probably shouldn't have been there at the Capitol, should be subject to monitoring for psychological issues, and that maybe the gender dysphoria is part of a larger mental health issue that possibly could have been induced by their military service, right? But they don't approach it that way. They approach this by saying that notwithstanding possible abuses of this person's civil rights as a detained person, as a person under arrest, a suspect for a criminal offense, it doesn't matter because their views are so abhorrent that they are not entitled to the same civil rights and liberties that typically these left-wing people insist are part of the reason that imprisonment and law enforcement need to be dismantled. So we're seeing basically all of this obsession with the criminal justice system and mass incarceration and denial of civil rights and due process. The only thing that's needed in order to erase those concerns from the minds of people on the left, whether it is with immigrant children or whether it is with a transsexual or whether it is with, a nominee for the Office of Management and Budget or the Attorney General or whatever. The only thing that it hinges on is whether they vote for one party or the other or support them. And that's really where I want to get to the larger topic for today, which I'm going to do a separate segment on. Let me stop the recording for a second. So we're going to have 2 videos uploading to BitChute. So the second video, I'm about to start the recording again. So the second video is going to be my larger message. So let me just take this away. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate these live streams into, 2 different topics when I can. That way I don't have to do uploads as well. It saves a little bit of time, and it's going to be a little bit more coherent. So we're going to start the recording now. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what I call the real checks and balances against tyranny. So the real checks and balances against tyranny are you and your skeptical mind. And I'm talking, whether you are a viewer who's watched this channel for the duration of its existence, or if you're just coming to the channel. I don't care whether you are someone who identifies with any political faction or any religion or anything. But I do want to tell you that this big tech censorship and the alt tech backlash that we're trying to all support, me, other people who are active on alt tech, it is dependent on people actually making decisions and deciding to become a part of them, not being passive enablers of the system that is closing in on society and making it less free, right? And I hope that through this movement to embrace alt tech and embrace also a new liberty-minded society, I'm hoping that we could help humanity, keep progressing and avoid some of the real darker periods that we've seen in the past of tyranny and a lack of any sort of accountability for people in power, right? And that's why I'm saying that the real check and balance against tyranny is you and your skeptical mind. Because I had someone who I know say to me a couple months ago that it doesn't matter really what happened as far as the election and as far as whether there was wrongdoing or anything like that. In terms of the way that the voting process went, or who is the majority in Congress and who is in the White House, because we have checks and balances and the system works. And then that person, I didn't say what I wanted to say at the time because it would have been inappropriate in the setting we were in. It was a workplace setting. But he's dead wrong. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. The checks and balances are meant to preserve the powers of various people within the system of government, right? So the judiciary is able to check the power of Congress by invalidating laws, because that's how the judiciary is able to keep its own role within the system too. Now, sometimes that does involve protecting your liberties and personal freedoms too, but in reality, it's in order to preserve the judiciary's place within the system. Likewise, the executive is able to check the power of Congress against it by vetoing bills, right? If you're a governor or the president, you veto a bill that comes to you that's not to your liking, and it has to go back to Congress. And if they want, they can pass it with an overriding majority, which isn't too common, but it happens at times. And then Congress can check the presidency through the power of the purse, and Congress can check the Supreme Court by not agreeing to confirm justices or judges or anything, or changing the laws or making amendments. That's the way checks and balances work. But you're not you don't have any of those checks and balances. You, the viewer, or you, the person who is watching at home or listening on your computer, you're not part of those checks and balances. So basically, don't forget all that shit, right? Your check and balance against the system is your ability to exercise any of the choices that are still afforded to you. And it is, I'm not telling you that you're going to change because you're going to change anything simply because you decide that you're not going to tweet anymore, simply because you decide that you're not going to buy Coke because of, various racist anti-white propaganda that they've published in the past few days, simply because you have decided you're going to cancel your Disney Plus a subscription. I recently canceled a subscription to Netflix. Now, I think those are important things, and you're not going to change everything overnight. But collectively, if enough people do start to produce that change, it does have a collective effect. And I think that society starts to move a certain way because there are trends that corporate America has to respond to, that Congress has to respond to. And I think that it requires really a change in attitude from people, right? I think in the past few days, I think it was published that AT&T lost a massive amount of money. This was, hold on, from DirecTV. Sorry, this is interrupting my train of thought, but apparently, DirecTV a few years ago was bought out by AT&T, right? So for those of you that don't live in the U.S., there is, of course, AT&T, which is one of our largest corporations, and it's very connected to all sorts of telecom industries. And then, of course, there's also DirecTV, which is satellite TV. And apparently, MTV was, I keep saying MTV for some reason, but DirecTV was bought in 2015 for $48.5 billion. It was $67 billion in debt. And now it's valued at around $15 billion. So they lost a total of $33.3 billion or $33.5 billion through that. And why are they losing it? Because people are cutting the cord with cable. And you might be asking, bold like a leopard, who gives a fuck? What are you talking about? The reason that this is important is because people make decisions based on their personal, their personal self-interest. They're selfish, right? This is the major premise behind capitalism, behind the invisible hand. Adam Smith, one of the greatest thinkers of the Western world, the Scottish economist of the 18th century, was saying that, people have a selfish, drive to do things that benefit themselves. And that's really what moves humanity forward, for better or worse, right? There are things that humans do that are not, they are selfish, but they don't benefit humanity. So basically what I'm trying to tell you is that your selfishness can benefit you or it can hurt you. Now, tomorrow night happens to be a holiday in Judaism. It's called Purim, right? I'll be celebrating with a few friends and family and my wife, of course. And, we'll probably be having a few drinks. And the Purim holiday commemorates a significant event in Jewish history where the Persian Empire was ruling over both historical Judea as well as most of the known world, right? All the way to Turkey and Egypt and everything. And the Persian chamberlain, the main chamberlain, the person who was the second in command of the king, Haman, decreed that all the Jews should be slaughtered on a certain date. And the holiday commemorates the miraculous process by which the queen, who herself was a Judean, right? Or actually she was from the tribe of Benjamin, but whatever. She was the queen of Persia, and the miraculous circumstances that led to her becoming both the queen of Persia and also canceling the decree and having the person who levied the decree, basically executed for attempting to perpetrate genocide. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is, like, a lot of this had to do with personal choices, right? The people who were major characters in the book of Esther, which is it's in the Bible. If you're a Christian, by the way, you could probably look this up. The book of Esther is in the Old Testament. It should be in your Bible. Doesn't matter which version. And the key players in this story, whether it is the king Xerxes, Ahasuerus in Hebrew, but or maybe in ancient Persian, but in English we call him Xerxes. He chose his queen. He also chose Haman, his prime minister, his chamberlain. And Esther, of course, she didn't have too much of a choice in this process. This was by the royal decree. You also have her uncle being very much involved in this. He chose in this story not to kneel to the royal chamberlain, to Haman. He said, I only bow to the Lord, to God. And this is something there are people in my audience who are religious. A lot of them are Jewish. Some of them happen to be Catholic. I don't know if I have any Muslim subscribers or anything on any of the platforms. But I see and I sense a lot of the opposite attitude from religious people. There's a saying that a lot of Jews they actually say that is they say it's all up to Hashem, or it's in Hashem's hands and things like that. And what it really means is that, yes, you as a human, you don't get to control the way the world behaves. You're just part of a larger scheme and things like that. But I think it's being abused in order to tell people, when you tell people, well, in reality, you don't have any agency. Your agency is completely an illusion. You don't get a real choice. You have to basically accept the fate that's given to you by the Lord. That's really the attitude that I hear when people say this, and I just disagree heavily with it. If you believe in a God that sees value in humankind, why would he create humans that are basically just puppets that are incapable of making real choices, right? And I say this also, there might be some atheists out there too. So you might be actually nodding along and saying, yes, those dumb religious people, how can they really? So I'm saying this as a general message. So whoever you are, whatever, religion you're a part of, I think you're going to process it a different way. But I think it's ludicrous to believe that you should just accept things the way they are and, behave as if you are a powerless person with no agency in the world, right? You do get to make you should cherish the few choices that you do get, if you have any, right? And one of those choices, I believe, that is a totally crucial choice is embracing forms of communication that give you more freedom and don't, fence you in and force you to behave a certain way, not use certain words, not express certain ideas, not talk about certain topics. I believe in total freedom. That's one of the reasons it's hard for me to actually communicate with people who have a religious background. A lot of them don't understand it because they do see certain forms of communication as completely immoral, or certain ideas as completely immoral. So while I do have a lot of, I certainly am a believer that there is meaning, of course, to the Bible. There is a meaning to everything that's in it. And I think that there is some sort of cosmic reality to what's going on. I don't subscribe to the attitudes of these people. And another issue I see with them, and I'm going to try to close up soon, is that while they talk about how powerless they are to do things, they still make the choices that they make. So a lot of them, they'll invest, and this is, I know that they get the choice. I don't know what choice I would make in their spot, but often they'll invest tons of money into their child's education. In some cases, these are Catholics who send their kids to Catholic school. These are Jews who send them to Jewish day school or even boarding school. I know people who they're not Catholic and they send their kids to Catholic school. And that's all well and good, but you have to realize at this point that you can invest as much money as you want in your child's education. Ultimately, the society that you're putting them out to doesn't value them as an individual. They value them as sort of a chip, a poker chip, right? They use them. They have basically we're going to use another analogy here. Sorry to skip over, but they're basically like a trading card. So you have a trading card with various different diversity points on it. Like if you're playing Pokemon, you'll have certain points on it, right? This is a Charizard. It has this damage or whatever. So with the society, they don't care literally whether your child has studied, the entire catechism or the Talmud or any of the the Bhagavad Gita or the Quran, or it does not care, because those books and texts, they will twist the meaning of all of them in order to conform with a broader unipolar vision of society that they believe in. And I'm talking about, of course, the media. I'm talking, of course, about corporate America. I'm talking about the people who are part of the social upper class, the elite that people are continually, complaining about, justifiably. So the more you invest in education, unfortunately, it's not enough. I think a lot of these people, they'll shell out checks and they'll endlessly talk about how we need to keep our kids in these educational institutions, often which are not that great, but none of them will spend the minimum amount of money either for personal defense, whether it is in the form of a firearm or sending their child. This is a different thing that I've always thought is even more important. Send your child to personal defense classes. I know somebody who I'm very happy to say, I didn't tell him that, but he's sending his kids to boxing classes. Great. They don't do anything for their own personal defense. They don't actually voice their own opinions ever to any, there's a lot of people out there who they basically behave as if they don't have a choice when they make a choice not to do something that they do have a choice to do, right? Not making a choice is a choice in and of itself. So that's why I keep trying to harp on this. The real check and balance that you have against tyranny is you and your skeptical mind. It's not going to be Congress. It's not going to be the president. It's not going to be letters to the editor. It's not going to be shit posting on Twitter. It's not going to be buying, various trinkets from the Trump campaign and things like that I know, I actually have a friend who was pretty proud. He bought a MAGA hat and he was wearing it around the office where he was working and things like that. And you can feel proud of your political beliefs, but that doesn't advance them very much. You have to start exercising your conscious mind, reading as many books as you can, formulating opinions, supporting them as much as you can through the choices that you make. And those are consumer choices. Those are choices in terms of where you spend your time, where the businesses you patronize and things like that, and which type of media you consume. And those all aggregate. And will that create a better and freer society? Maybe not. But that is the choice that you're allowed. And that's the only check and balance that you have, whether or not you are black, white, Hispanic, German, Polynesian, whatever the fuck you want. Those are the only choices that you have. Which types of products and services you buy and use, right? So that's my main message for today. And I think it's a universalist message. I try to give messages in my writings that you don't have to be of any sort of belief system or race in order to subscribe to them. So that's about it. I do want to remind you before I leave that I have a newsletter. It is called Razor Sharp Report. Let me bring up the link page real quick. If I even have it open. I might not have it open. 1 second. So here we go. So you'll see it in a second. So yeah, you can subscribe to me on there, and I will probably have a new newsletter coming out next week. You can also find me on, so again, this is Razor Sharp News on Substack. I will put that in the description real quick. So welcome, Ophir. I'm glad you got here at the end. You can also find me on BitChute and on Rumble and on Odyssey. For those of you that want to see my videos, these are the replays. So I will be putting up 2 videos, splitting up this live stream. So this is from Odyssey. You got here my BitChute over there, and you can also find my Rumble over here, and that's about it. So I do want to tell you I'll probably try to do a live stream next week with somebody else, maybe even 2 live streams. So one of them is with a person who's been on before, Swarthy Immigrant. He typically streams with Lennon McCarthy 2.0, and another with a different colleague. So that's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe, and also subscribe on all the platforms mentioned before.